This is Sophia Koetsier. She was smiling, carefree, and despite the foreshadowing video clips, was full of positivity. But what you are seeing here are several video clips which were recorded only a few days before she suddenly vanished. You see, Sophia was wrapping up an 8-week internship in Uganda with a promising future in medicine back home in Amsterdam. However, before returning back home, she wanted to have one last adventure, a 2-week tour across the country with a guide and 3 fellow travelers. What began as a dream trip would quickly unravel into a nightmare, and on their 8th day, tragedy struck when Sophia disappeared into thin air. And trust me, the deeper that you look into this case, the stranger and more unsettling it becomes. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the strange case of Sophia Koetsier. By the way, this is just a quick heads up that this case still remains unsolved to this day. I know a few of you don't like open-ended cases, so this is your warning. I do think it's great to talk about these stories though to help bring awareness to the situation, and with this case recently receiving a new update, now's a great time. Before we begin, I post 1 to 2 videos a week here, so if you'd like to be part of the Coffeehouse crime community, please hit subscribe. And now, with all of that out the way, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Sophia Koetsier. Welcome to Amsterdam, folks. A city where the streets are water, the cars are bikes, and somehow everyone looks effortlessly well-fashioned. The city is somewhat of a paradox, actually, having both small-town cozy vibes while holding an internationally glamorous aura. Amsterdam is home to many contrasts too. By day, you can lose yourself in the many museums and art galleries, and by night, the glow of red lights and the haze coming from so-called coffee shops remind you that the city is unafraid of confronting human vices. Of course, all while maintaining blunt Dutch practicality. Amsterdam thrives on both curiosity and connection. It's a city that prizes honesty, values art, and somehow still manages to bake the perfect stroopwafel. In short, it's beautiful, bizarre, and brilliantly alive. And for Sophia Koetsier, it was home. Born on December 7th, 1993, Sophia grew up as the oldest child and the only daughter in her family, and alongside her had 2 younger brothers. Born and raised in Amsterdam, Sophia went on to become ambitious, bright, and brimming with curiosity. She would thrive in school too, earning her International Baccalaureate diploma with a double science profile in the year 2012. For a time, she dreamed of the stage, studying at youth theatre schools with hopes of becoming an actress. However, as she grew older and her passions matured, she would eventually find a deeper calling in medicine. Passing all of the entrance exams with ease, she went on to study at the University of Amsterdam, where, by the year 2015, she had completed her bachelor's degree with flying colours. However, rather than continue straight into her master's degree, which of course was the next required step to becoming a doctor, Sophia decided to pause for a year instead. She quickly realized that if she were to take any time off after she graduated, it would unfortunately reduce the likelihood of her finding work. So the plan was quite simple, really. Now that her bachelor's degree was finished, she would go off for a year and do whatever she wanted, before then returning home and finishing her master's degree. And that is precisely what she did. Practical yet adventurous at the same time, she wanted to have real-world experience before then being forced to settle. Even from a young age, Sophia was both multi-talented and extremely hard-working. She always seemed to be busy, and that was probably because she always worked more than 2 jobs and also volunteered at the local care home. She was known to be social, fun-loving, and even that thing that we always hear in these stories, that she lit up a room whenever she entered. And look, I know it's quite a generic thing to say, but this is genuinely how her friends described her. To add more depth to her personality here, she enjoyed writing, drawing, playing the piano, and even dancing. And when it came to sports, she enjoyed basketball and rowing. By the year 2015, it became quite obvious that Sophia's ambitions were pretty much settled. Now, she wanted to become a doctor specializing in tropical medicine. And so, when she received the chance for an internship at Lubaga Hospital in Kampala, Uganda, Sophia quite literally jumped at the opportunity. Lubaga Hospital can be found at the heart of Uganda's capital city, Kampala. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a while, but it's one of the oldest hospitals in Uganda and serves part of Kampala's 1.8 million residents. Being both optimistic and fearless at the opportunity, Sophia even started learning their local language, Luganda. And that's because she was determined to not merely just work at this hospital, but also connect with its people. And so, at only 21 years old, she finally set off, ready to dive into a new culture and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was the very beginning of a new chapter that was supposed to be filled with growth, discovery, and service. However, that so-called next chapter would tragically be her final one too. Sophia landed in Uganda on August the 31st, 2015. Wide-eyed, backpacked, and ready for the kind of internship that would shape her life forever, she was very keen to get stuck into both the Ugandan and medical worlds. Through ASIC, she moved into a student home in Kampala, which had a mix of Dutch volunteers and Ugandan students. Was it fun? Absolutely. But was it silent? Not a chance at all. In many of her messages back home, she always wrote that it was never quiet. But for someone who seemed to thrive on activity, that chaos always felt like fuel. As the days turned into weeks, she bonded fast with housemates, colleagues, and even the city itself. And by mid-October, even her mother, Maria, had flown in from Amsterdam for a quick visit. At the time, Maria was approaching the end of her career in film production and journalism, and for her, this was a great moment to share with her daughter. The Great Reunion, which happened on October the 14th, appeared to be all smiles and hugs. And of course, it also reassured Maria that Sophia wasn't only safe, but thriving too. Sophia threw herself into work at hospital, fascinated by both her patients and her responsibilities. Workers reported her being one of the best students that they ever had, and she even seemed to pick up parts of Luganda, that being the local language, so that she could banter with both patients and staff. Over the following weeks, her routine became working at the hospital, making journeys to the markets and nightclubs, and taking many hikes all around the city, and of course also trying all of the local foods. Some she loved and, well, others not so much. I mean, you can't blame her, really. It is quite clear that she found genuine excitement and purpose in Uganda, and as the 8-week stint slowly wound down, she admitted that she wasn't quite ready to leave yet. Tropical medicine was no longer just an idea to her, it had quite literally become her calling. On October the 22nd, 2015, her internship had finally, sadly wrapped up, and after saying goodbye, Sophia could finally have her reward. As you can probably guess, that being a road trip with her friends. That is when Sophia, 2 Dutch friends that she had met on placement, and a hired driver guide named Michael all set off to see Uganda properly, which included savannas, waterfalls, and dozens of small towns. It was going to be 10 beautiful days of freedom, of course, before eventually catching a flight back home in early November. And so, with this dream in mind, what could possibly go wrong? Well, at first, nothing. The group first travelled north towards Kidepo Valley National Park, known for its rugged, remote, and breathtaking scenery. After that, they then checked in to Apoka Safari Lodge around October the 26th, where the assistant warden, Stephen, remembered them checking in to 2 cottages. Their spirits were quite high that night, maybe a little too high in fact, because later that evening, neighbours put in a polite notice to ask them to quieten down. After that, Sophia went the extra mile by apologising to all of her neighbours. It was in that moment that one of them recalls her acting a little bit strange, and apparently she even appeared to be quite vulnerable. And then, later that night, and before dawn of October the 27th, the trip would suddenly take a rather strange turn. At around 4 AM, everyone inside that camp suddenly woke up to some rather aggressive banging. One of the rangers who was on duty at the time stepped outside to investigate, and when he did, that is when he found Sophia on an elevated platform striking multiple interpretive panels. And for those who are wondering what that means, because I was confused when I first read it, it's basically those large metal signs you see at tourist hotspots that have multiple languages. What was also very concerning is that apparently Sophia was trying to set fire to the grass nearby, which was both extremely dangerous and out of character for her. So, this is where the first of many twists begin, and it's probably worth highlighting at this stage that Sophia was in fact bipolar, though apparently she never suffered from any depression and only manic episodes. In essence, she was unipolar. Now, according to her family, Sophia would only experience mania when she was exposed to heightened moments for a prolonged period of time, and especially when she wasn't given any time to relax or process them. Which, of course, when considering that she was on an 8-week trip to a new country, does indeed make a lot of sense. Unfortunately, there are multiple reports that claim that Sophia was acting crazy during this moment. However, it is much more accurate to say that she was having a manic episode, which was triggered by too much of a good thing. Sophia was clearly distressed either way. All of her friends were worried for her. A passerby got the impression that she was incredibly vulnerable at this stage, and the warden even urged Michael to cut the tour short and take her to a hospital immediately. At the time, Michael even seemed to agree. In fact, even several hours after this episode, she still appeared to be unstable. At one point, even trying to throw herself out from the moving van. Shaken by the entire incident, the group then left Kidepo and reached Gulu on the 27th, skipping one of the planned stops in the process to get there faster. The assumption at the time was quite simple, that Sophia desperately needed help. Worried by the situation, that is when her friends decided to call her mum Maria at 6:30 p.m. on October the 28th, telling her that they would take her daughter back to Kampala the next day and then check her into a hospital. Sensible and safe. Their decision had finally been made. Except it wasn't, because despite all the advice and common sense, Michael, who was the group's tour guide, made the decision not to turn the vehicle back around, instead opting to drive west into Murchison Falls. Both vast and wild, it's a spectacular place to be when you're in good condition. The Nile squeezes through a gorge, with savannas rolling to the horizon, and the area is teeming with beautiful wildlife. So, considering Sophia's condition, why did the group go? Well, maybe they had hoped to salvage the trip, or maybe Sophia had come back down to earth. Or maybe their guide Michael disliked the idea of cancelling and therefore losing money. Whatever the reason was, by late afternoon of October the 28th, they were deep inside Murchison Falls National Park and far away from the capital. And tragically, this would be the last day that anyone saw Sophia. After reaching the park, the group set off to do what most visitors do, of course, that being to drift the River Nile. It was a good moment to realize how much wildlife is around them, with hippos and crocs in the water, and elephants and giraffes on the banks. I mean, after all of that chaos in Kidepo, it was the kind of calm that the group needed. By all accounts, Sophia was quiet on that cruise too, maybe perhaps because her strange episode had passed. Or maybe she was simply just tired. As the afternoon turned into the evening, the group decided to check in to the Student Education Center, which essentially was a bunch of basic dormitory huts inside of the national park. And sure, it was close to a rural road, but otherwise was out in the middle of nowhere. At around 6 p.m., that being roughly 45 minutes before sunset, Sophia told the others that she was heading to the bathroom, which was only a short walk away. Meanwhile, her friends decided to stay back in the dormitory to unpack, expecting her to return back shortly. With that in mind, Sophia said she'd be right back and then walked out of the front door. However, that was the final time that her friends saw her, because Sophia never came back. Now, at first, there was no panic because, of course, we're talking about the bathroom here, where basically everybody wants their privacy. However, as the sun began to fade, the group slowly began to worry. And after walking over to the bathroom block and calling out her name, they realized that not only was it silent, but it was completely empty too. That was the moment that changed everything, and within 15 minutes, all of Sophia's friends and the driver were scouring the area for her. Meanwhile, they were desperately calling for rangers to come help find her. But no matter how loud they shouted or how deep they looked for her, Sophia was gone. It was literally as if she had disappeared. Park rangers mobilized fast, sweeping the bush around the center and then outward in rings. The problem was the dark, because on moonless nights, Murchison Falls really does feel like ink. In the middle of night, you can't see anything out there, and park rangers have to hunt with their ears more than they do their eyes. Despite their efforts, the first night of investigating revealed nothing, and by daylight, the search had widened. Police officers joined park rangers, with dozens of teams walking on footpaths, through dense bushland, and along the riverbank. And on the note of the river, that was another huge threat to Sophia's safety, because not only was she against the wildlife, elements, and even possibly humans, but that river had the power to send her hundreds of miles downstream, and that's not even taking the rapid currents and crocodiles into account. Going back to the school, as you can see, the toilet block that she had used was on the perimeter of the property, making it easy for Sophia, or perhaps even someone else, to slip in and out without being detected. It was later that day that officers found their first clue. Local rangers had found an empty plastic water bottle by the Nile, which eventually was recognized to be Sophia's. This of course suggested that she had possibly made it down to the water, but why? And where did she go from there? By sunset, the operation had grown to one of the largest search and rescue operations that the park had ever seen. It included land patrols, boats on the river, helicopters above, and tracking dogs, and they were all working around the clock to try and find her. Back in Kampala, Sophia's mum had dropped everything and headed straight towards Sophia. She arrived at the park on October the 30th, stepping straight into the command tent and the center of a nightmare. And it was soon after she arrived that more strange clues were found. Not far from the bottle, searchers discovered torn, colorful fabric, not just on the ground, but also tied to twigs. And it turns out that all of these shreds of fabric were actually pieces of Sophia's clothes. And then, nearby, and 5 meters off the ground in a tree, they found even more fragments. This time, it was parts of her underwear and pants, all of which seemed to be knotted in branches. Her shoe was there too, placed neatly, dry and clean. And nearby lay an empty little pouch and her other shoe. Now, this is kind of obvious to say here, but all of this was beginning to sound extraordinarily suspicious. I mean, when I first heard about the water bottle, I was thinking maybe she just walked down to the river and then accidentally slipped in. But when her clothes were found scattered across the area, some in incredibly hard to reach places, that didn't just seem strange. It seemed calculated. The whole thing quite literally looked staged, even theatrically so, and it baffled everyone working on the case. To make things even stranger and more concerning, that area had actually already been searched the night prior. And so, why were things now all of a sudden turning up? I mean, there are only two options here really. They were either missed that night, or someone had placed them there later. For the family, it was a dark kind of humor that they really could have done without in an already harrowing situation. And as for the scene itself, well, it offered nothing useful. There was no blood, no drag marks, and no sign of wildlife. And even if we do entertain the idea that she had undressed herself in confusion and then entered the water, well, how does that describe her shoes and clothes appearing 5 meters off the ground? These clues ignited people's efforts, and on November the 4th, that being 7 days into her disappearance, a specialized Dutch team arrived with both drones and equipment. In the meantime, forensic officers had collected all of the clothing found in the bushland, and tests would later confirm that not only did it contain Sophia's DNA, but it also contained DNA from an unknown individual. And rather concerningly, the foreign DNA was found specifically on her underwear. This was a large clue, not only to external interference, but also potentially a motive. However, without a match, this was yet again another dead end. With no body, no sighting, and no confirmed trail beyond her bottle or clothes, this sadly was a puzzle that no one could solve. And while local and international media were initially interested in Sophia's disappearance, attention seemed to dwindle and then fade over the following weeks. No surprise, but in the interest of money found through tourism, local authorities leaned towards a tragic accident more than anything else. They claimed that Sophia had either fallen into the Nile or been attacked by a crocodile or hippo, which they believe, both of which were triggered by a misadventure during a mental health crisis. Now, obviously, the family pushed back hard. There was simply way too much information which didn't seem to add up, and personally, I think they're right to say that too. I mean, not only were her clothes found all over the place, but to have her underwear tied to a branch 5 meters up a tree. Come on guys, that doesn't sound like a crocodile attack to me. If they really were that smart, we would all be screwed. Filled with pain, desperation, and now also anger, Maria stayed in Uganda for weeks after this. She did absolutely everything that she could think of, including coordinating with the police, organizing private searches, and speaking to anyone who might know a thing or two about Sophia. And even when she returned to the Netherlands, Maria vowed that the search for her daughter would never end. And so, unfortunately, even to this day, Sophia hasn't been found. However, her mother believes that, without any definitive evidence, there is still hope. And so now, we're going to look at the many theories of what potentially could have happened. From accidents through to trafficking, there are several possibilities here, ranging from plausible to highly unlikely. So, with that said, let's begin with the most innocent. The first official line from the Ugandan police was that Sophia had accidentally fallen into the River Nile, probably while restless or disoriented. And at first, that does certainly sound plausible, especially considering how unforgiving that river can be. However, there are big problems with this theory. For example, there were no obvious signs at the river's edge. No blood, no drag marks in the mud, nothing. And if this included a crocodile or a hippo attack, well, they are usually very violent and leave a lot of evidence behind. Things like torn clothing, bite marks, or even disturbed ground. Now, if Sophia had simply drowned, then you would expect her body, or at least some of her clothing, to eventually turn up downstream, especially considering that the river leads into a lake and not the ocean. But despite this, nothing ever showed up, not even a single trace. But the one thing that truly undercuts this theory is the clothing. Sophia's shoes and shorts were found far away from the water, dry and neatly removed. And again, some even up a tree. These sorts of clues seemed to be placed, and badly at that. Kind of the so-called clues that I'd expect from Amy Betro, but not the River Nile itself. Moving on, here is theory number 2. Could Sophia have maybe been taken by a lion or a leopard instead? Well, Murchison Falls does indeed have big cats, and a lone person at night is definitely vulnerable to them. So, on paper, it does seem to fit the bill. But in practice, again, not really. An attack like that usually leaves a long trail of blood, drag marks, tracks, and even remains. Something that the many search teams, which included dozens of seasoned trackers, never found. Obviously, the clothing pattern is off too. Predators, or should I say the animal kind, don't undress their prey. And they certainly don't hang shoes neatly in trees. Park officials did seem to consider the scenario for a while, but ultimately they called it unlikely based on the facts. And of course, those items that are tied neatly to twigs point towards human hands and not really paws. Theory 3. Could Sophia maybe have had a sudden psychological break or manic episode? Well, it is true that you could read her manic behavior the morning before as a possible precursor. But interestingly enough, this does remind me of the case of Elisa Lam, who likely chose to swim in the rainwater tank while having a manic episode. And on that basis, maybe Sophia wanted to swim in the River Nile. It is technically possible that, in a manic state, she could have removed her clothes, climbed a tree, and then took a swim in the river before suddenly losing strength in its current. And if she really did try to set the grass on fire the day before, this does suggest that her judgment had tipped into genuinely dangerous territory. But I also wanted to say that scaling down a tree naked and without any shoes does indeed sound like a recipe for disaster. I mean, it would have likely resulted in broken bones and blood left behind. But still, that tree was examined and no blood was found. I'm also going to put this one out there, but I genuinely do not believe that Sophia had any intent whatsoever to take her own life. She was never depressive, always positive, and had so much going for her. When Elisa Lam had a manic episode, she hid in an elevator after feeling threatened, and it is possible that maybe Sophia felt the same way. So one possibility here is that maybe after going to the toilet, Sophia felt threatened, panicked, ran, climbed a tree, and then took off her clothes, either due to overheating or to mark a trail. But what would have happened afterwards, nobody knows, and I still think that this theory is quite the stretch. Next is theory 4. Negligence or foul play by the tour guide. To be honest with you, I do believe this one is quite valid. You can't examine this case without scrutinizing the driver, Michael, and for very good reasons too. Not only was he the last person responsible for Sophia's safety, but he also made multiple poor decisions while she was vulnerable. This includes driving her to Murchison Falls against explicit advice, booking bare-bones lodging areas with no real safety measures, not keeping close watch that evening despite her state, and that one other big thing, not actually being a licensed tour guide. At minimum, that is negligence that helped create the perfect conditions for her disappearance. However, did it go any further? Well, it turns out that there are actually a few inconsistencies here. For example, when Kadepo's warden Nyadru called Michael after hearing Sophia was missing, Michael first claimed that they had never actually entered Murchison Falls at all. So, why say that? Was it panic, or was it something far darker? To add to this, we must also look at the unknown DNA that was found on Sophia's clothing. The gender of the DNA has not actually been publicly confirmed yet, but if it was male and also matched Michael's DNA, well, that is one tough story. But the likelihood is that he's probably been tested and excluded, and of course, that's another story all on its own. Now, personally, I do believe that the clothing was left behind as a deliberate plot to throw officers, and locals also noted that an unlicensed operator might try to avoid police entanglement, for obvious reasons. So, where does this theory leave us? With a strong case for negligence, several red flags, and a lot of speculation, there are some warning signs around this one. However, until there's transparent forensic testing and a consistent account, we are none the wiser. And finally, there is one other theory that most of us are thinking. Of course, that being that Sophia was abducted by a third-party stranger. Sadly, we can't rule out the simplest and ugliest possibility that someone else was there to take her. If we were to look at the map again, you can see that the centre was cheap, open, and perfectly unfenced. In fact, rangers, workers, and other visitors would often drift through the site without warning or permission. So, if Sophia had gone to the bathroom and then crossed paths with the wrong person, she certainly would have been vulnerable. And although no screams were reported, she could have quite possibly been knocked out without warning. The unknown DNA found on her clothing would also suggest that she did in fact cross paths with someone. And since she is not reported to have been intimate with anybody before she disappeared, we can only speculate that the DNA found on her underwear was there for the most nefarious of reasons. But sadly, without a body, we have no idea what happened. However, that doesn't stop many people from wondering and even believing that maybe she was abducted, abused, murdered, kidnapped for ransom, or possibly even trafficked. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these facts, which are used between multiple theories, can be read in multiple ways, which means that a lot of these theories do actually interweave between each other. So, whether this was a lucid moment, Mother Nature, a negligent guide, or even a predator lurking in the shadows, all of the facts do lead to various outcomes. By the way, this is a phenomenon known as multifinality. I'm just going to ask my editor, Callum, to leave a graph up here to let you know what I'm talking about. Many opinions on this story tilt towards foul play. Given the many clues left behind, the driver's choices, the gaps in the group's timeline, and all of the other inconsistencies, many people believe that this does tilt towards foul play. Now, if you were to ask me, I think the most damning articles of evidence here is everything found around that tree, which of course includes the dry shoes found nearby, clothing tied like markers, and especially the foreign DNA found on her underwear. All of this just seems to point towards some sort of third party. And even if you entertain the idea of some manic episode gone wrong, many of these clues simply do not add up. Ultimately, every theory collapses into two possibilities here. Either Sophia is alive somewhere, unheard and unseen, or sadly, she is dead. But until we find any fresh evidence or some of the current evidence gets resolved, we are still none the wiser. Only 2 months ago, that being in July of 2025, Sophia's case actually returned to court. The tour guide, Michael, seems to be in very hot water because not only was he found out to not have a license required to look after Sophia and her group, but there are still many questions about his negligence on the day too. It is really hard to tell if this will go anywhere, so for now, we will just have to wait and see. So, before I wrap this video up and share my own analysis, I would like to highlight Sophia's mother and her current stance on this case. Maria is still very hopeful that something will eventually come from the recent court updates, and she would also like the world to see her daughter for who she really is, not how some have depicted her throughout this process. For that reason, I'd like to share a couple things from her recent blog posts. Found within, she said, "To this day, her disappearance remains a mystery that has dominated our lives ever since. In my unrelenting search for Sophia and for answers, I have made many journeys to Uganda, always hoping that the many questions we have will be answered one day, when asked by the right people. On Monday, July the 7th, 2025, I testified in Buganda Road Court. Sophia is being depicted as a crazy girl, and this is painful to read for us who know her so well. I feel the urge to explain her bipolar condition, which I believe is not well understood. Bipolar is not a mold that everyone with this diagnosis fits into. 10 to 15% only become manic, never depressed. And Sophia belongs to that category, which in essence makes her unipolar. Manic episodes occur when there are a lot of incentives and new experiences, and not enough rest to process everything. The latter was clearly the case in those 8 weeks in Kampala, and quiet is crucial for Sophia, who is far from crazy. She was ill when she disappeared and needed care. The ultimate nightmare of every parent, wherever in the world, is that your child leaves on a road trip abroad and does not return home. For us, a reality, day and night, ever since October the 28th, 2015. As long as we receive no evidence to the contrary, we maintain our belief that she is alive. We must continue searching and do everything that is humanly possible to find our daughter. The insecurity that we live with day in and out is devastating, and doing nothing is not an option. Maria admits that, to this day, and ever since her daughter's disappearance, she has become a shadow of her former self.
Are you still filming?
So, what do I think happened to Sophia? Honestly, it's a painful conclusion to reach, but I believe that Sophia was probably abducted by someone who was waiting for her. The clues are kind of obvious when you look at it. I don't think this was self-inflicted, and it certainly wasn't wildlife. And so, something, or rather someone, must have intervened that night. Was it her driver, an opportunistic outsider, or perhaps even maybe a dark collusion between the two? Sadly, we may never know. But I do feel it's almost certain that another party was responsible. The theory of abduction, or perhaps even murder, is not helped by the wider context either, because many Western governments advise against all travel to Uganda. And that's because, unfortunately, Uganda has its own fair share of homicide, violence, and sexual crime. It's a hard truth that, simply put, we cannot ignore. Anyway, those are my own thoughts on the case of Sophia Koetsier. But as always, I'd love to know what you think about this one. What do you think happened to Sophia? Please share your thoughts down below, and this is just a reminder, but please remain respectful. And I think I'll probably leave it here, folks. I think I've pretty much said all that I know about this case. As always, thank you so much for making it this far today. I really do appreciate you staying here. Oh, and by the way, if you want to see another unsolved case that I've recently recorded, then you might be interested in the episode that I've done with Crime Solvers Central. I'll leave a link for that down below, but basically, we cover the case of the Jameson family murders, a haunting story that still remains unsolved to this day. And yeah, with that said, I think we've basically reached the end of the video today, folks. On that note, thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you again very shortly for another one. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourselves, look after each other, and of course, stay safe and stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.